You can't disciple all nations without engaging the deceptions that have held those nations captive.
Absolutely.
It is that the cults are the unpaid bills of the church.
Ew.
The scripture's warned about that. They're preaching another Jesus.
These political ideologies, at the end of the day, you're making God in your image.
Does the color of Christ really matter?
Big shout out to our sponsors, man. Chick-fil-A, Broad Creek Crossing in Norfolk, Virginia, right off Military Highway. Go check my folk out. You already know what the chicken is. All right, man, we back. Welcome to, I think this is episode 6. Welcome to the Legend Podcast.
Yeah.
Super glad you're here. We got the crew. And listen, this is my podcast where I told everybody to wear a change of clothes, and the only one that didn't listen was me. So if you watch the last episode, I got on the same gear. But it's the same day. I ain't funky. God is good.
You just went a whole week wearing the same outfit?
Chill. I just literally laid out there. Chill. Stop.
Same socks.
You can't say you cannot apologetically prove.
Same boxes, all that.
A whole nine.
Pause.
Hey.
What? Anyway.
He said pause.
Man, look, we here. If you watched the last episode, we got the homie here. First, we got to go with the illustrious. Is he illustrious?
I'm illustrious.
So
illustrious.
Ambidextrous.
Ambidextrous co-host.
There we go.
Yeah, the ambidextrous co-host, JB Harris.
Oh,
We got our illustrious co-host, Trevor Lucas with Anomaly Art Studio.
Sir.
And did you pick up one that we could give him?
nah, he just like pinky in the brain or something.
Oh, man.
It's-
Pinky in the brain.
You said
I can't be
cerebral.
I'm both.
The
A
brain.
cerebral gas.
cerebral gas. Okay. There it is. The cerebral. Adam Coleman.
He's out going to leave me hanging.
My man, G, sorry.
It's all right.
So if you did miss it, Adam Coleman runs a minute. Oh, we didn't even talk about last episode. I'm sorry. True ID Apologetics. Check him out on YouTube, podcast, all the things. My brother is a genius with pulling up the historical evidence for the faith and why we trust what we believe and all that. So he's here to talk more about that. We had a really good conversation about all that before.
Sure.
Because why would you believe something that you can't prove? It's
crazy.
Feel what I'm saying? Like, why would you act? We don't want to have, we're going to have faith.
Yep.
We don't want to have grandmama told me so and could the Bible tell me so faith. We want to know why we trust the Bible. And that's actually where we're going today from a historical, journalistic perspective.
Right.
So with that in mind, while we talk about that, apologetics, again, if you missed it, is just simply a defense in why the faith is true.
Simple as that. There you go.
So you mentioned a couple folks like Frank Turek and all these type of dudes, really dope. I remember reading a book by a guy named Chris Brooks called Urban Apologetics.
Yeah,
right.
that's right. Yeah.
And then Adam, Dr. Mason put out the Urban Apologetics joint, to which you were a contributor.
Right. Oh, yeah. Chapter 12, yeah.
I was so hyped when I was.
Yeah, I got
was
it.
like, I know he in here.
Yeah, I got one too. I got an autographed copy. Though.
I should have brought
I should have brought mine.
But I was dope. I was reading it. I was like,
Yeah.
to do it in chapter 8, I know, but I'm gonna read and wait till I get. I ain't even skip. I wanted to get through. I was really proud of you, man.
Oh, appreciate that,
That was
man.
a
Thank you, man.
fantastic
Thank you,
resource. Great resource. We're gonna end this chapter with some resources. But the question is, all this stuff matters for everybody everywhere that's a believer. Like, why
Facts,
can you trust Jesus got about the grave? Can you trust his book? But what particular issues do you see in Black and minority communities as to why these matter? Why Chris Brooks and Eric Mason had to write urban apologetics, depending on your definition of urban or whatever. So, like,
got you.
Yeah. What do you see there? What's the need?
Yeah, man. So, some of it goes back to, and matter of fact, if you haven't caught it, you got to go back to the last episode and check it out. But some of it goes back to what we were talking about last time with just the gospel. Just the gospel. We think about Matthew chapter 28, right? We're given the so-called Great Commission. What does Jesus say? He's commissioning them to go make disciples of all nations. Those are two key words: disciples and nations. Now, the word nations in the Greek is the word ethnos. It just means people groups. So it's not like geographical, like USA or China or something. It's talking about people groups. So
Imaginary
all
drawn
people
lines
groups
on
in
the map.
world.
Right.
Exactly. The word disciple is not, it's something that we really don't pay enough attention to. Like, he didn't say go make converts. Just make disciples. People who have submitted their lives to the teaching and lifestyle of the rabbi. In this case, Jesus Christ, and by extension, the Holy Spirit, right? That's what it means to be a disciple, okay? Now, here's the thing. You can't disciple all nations without engaging the deceptions that have held those nations captive.
Absolutely.
Ooh, right? You can't disciple all nations, all people groups, without engaging the deceptions that have held those people groups captive.
That's good.
Right? Now, there are different beliefs and deceptions that take residence in different cultures. Not all cultures necessarily lean towards the same deceptions. In the African-American context and also other minorities, one of the forms of deception that are specific to us is this notion that Christianity is a white man's religion.
There we go.
Yeah,
You know, Christianity was beat into our ancestors, and therefore, you know, that's why we're Christian today. Christianity wasn't in Africa before the slave trade and so on and so forth. It's associated with white supremacy. All of those identity-related deceptions are something that's really specific to what's going on in the African-American context and some other minorities as well. So that's why it becomes important to have what we refer to as urban apologetics, right? Now, urban doesn't mean you just like doing apologetics or evangelism in the city. It's just really speaking to right, exactly. You got to dress in a certain way.
Right.
You know,
Pants ain't bag enough for me to preach to you, sir.
right.
Good. I can't
No,
preach
that's
to my apostles.
Oh, snap. So, I mean, it's just a shorthand way of saying like we're addressing those questions about and objections to Christianity that have arisen in urban settings primarily. So when you're talking about different worldviews and things of that nature that spring up from urban centers, that's what we're typically addressing. That's good. And many of those are going to harken back to, you know, Christianity is white man's religion and those things that I mentioned. And so, you know, it's important that we be aware of it, bro. You know, because I think that unfortunately, many Christians have been asleep at the wheel, you know, in terms of being a witness and equipping themselves to deal with those kinds of questions and objections.
I agree, man. Like I remember, you know, just back a couple of years, man, with things of last election cycle and beyond that, before that, you know what I mean? Like we in it again now, but like, it's crazy. That whole thing, I remember talking to, you know, a lot of white pastors who were friends of mine. And I was like, fam, if you don't talk about this from the stage, the smaller percentage of your congregation don't feel heard. Like now, are you afraid to talk about it because most of your congregation leans this way? To talk about it means you woke it out, or is this a gospel issue where there's justice happening and you just need to acknowledge it? Absolutely, you know what I mean? And you know, a lot of people that like they would like, let me be safe because I'm just gonna talk about the gospel, which is a beautiful thing. And I'm like, hey man, my you know, my minority attendees, man, they dropped. I was like, you know what they ran? They ran right into all these other belief systems that weren't afraid to do the thing. You know what I'm saying? Or they went back to predominantly black church, which isn't a bad thing either. Like you didn't mention it because you didn't care about the thing that was impacting that community because the majority of the folks were safe.
Well, no, so to your point, there's a guy, and I might mess his name up, is a theologian named J.K. Van Balen. And he says that the cults are the unpaid bills of the church.
Ew. Yeah.
I'm gonna buy this man's book.
Come on, bro. You know what I'm saying? The cults are the unpaid bills of the church, bro. And it's so real because it's exactly what you said. Yeah. I'm saying if you don't disciple people in all aspects of their lives, they have a hunger to find truth. So they're going to look somewhere else.
100%.
So either they're going to be listening to you, or not just you, but listen to the scriptures, what God has to say about people and how we should relate to them, or they're going to listen to Umar Johnson. Yeah, or they're going to listen to whatever other
something that
figures
they feel like they relate, their blackness relates to.
Right,
you know
exactly.
Because everybody has a passion and desire to feel seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't care who you are, I don't care how secure you think you are. If that wasn't true, everybody wouldn't be in pockets of community where everybody around look, think, act, and believe like that.
Yeah, exactly.
We care about that deeply. As people, we're tribal. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, we're whole people. And that's the thing is that I think if you look at, and we can get into it, but if you just look at the history of our people, you know, particularly in the diaspora, you know, going back to being in this context in Africa where our identity is shaped around things like, you know, let's say, for example, and I don't know where people get this notion. It's not the case that in Africa we were all just like one people, kings and queens, living it up. I mean, there was different tribes. You know, people had different markers on the skin.
Absolutely, about those kings and queens. Like nobody was subjects.
The kings had slaves.
Nobody had subjects. Like what are we doing?
Right.
Everybody has kings and queens.
Yeah, but we have this context within which we're forming identity. Then we're ripped away from it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we're not Awe and Fulani and Dahomey and so we're just black.
Yep. Yeah.
And other words I can use. You know what I'm saying? And so we all condensed into this one category. So our identity is being fractured. And all of a sudden, black is not beautiful. So we got centuries of really propaganda, you know, voicing this notion that black is not valuable, right? Yeah. And coupled with that, if we being real, you have a lot of people who were professing Christians who were part of that.
Absolutely.
Right? Who are using the cross for reasons that it wasn't intended. And so now
the scripture's warned about that. They're preaching another Jesus.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we could talk about that too. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna say this. You know, so what happens is your self-concept, your identity is like a puzzle piece. We're all made up of different pieces. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a, you know, a begrudging Washington Commanders fan. I'm a lot of different things. You know what I mean? But it's like a big puzzle. When you put all those puzzle pieces together, you have your big picture of who you are. So what's happening is people are looking at that Christianity piece, and then they're looking at that African identity piece, and they're like, man, these pieces don't fit.
Yeah, right.
And said, well, I know I'm black. And so if I'm gonna get rid of one of them, it's gonna be the Christianity part. And so there's this wedge between who they are.
Especially when I'm looking on TV, politically wise, right? And it looks like the other side who are conservative or whatever, and they're waving the Jesus flag.
Right.
If that's Jesus, I
want to throw all that away. Right.
So I don't know. I mean, we might have to edit this part out. I don't know if we want to edit this out or not. But and I'm gonna say it's not all. But there is a history of a type of syncretism in America where you are blurring the lines between God's kingdom and the earthly kingdom of the U.S.
I hate it so much.
Both in terms of ideology and so on and so forth. 100%. And when that happens, it dilutes what the kingdom really is about.
100%.
And it presents a stumbling block to people just like you're talking about.
Absolutely.
We're like, well, man, if Christianity is associated with white supremacy and USA this, USA that, I don't want that.
And I'm looking at you as a black man for following that.
Great. At you sideways.
Absolutely. No, we ain't editing that out. We need that.
And then like the argument, like it gets defensive to where like all the case you laid out. And then on the other side, it's like, well, if you really believe in this Jesus, why are you not calling out the white supremacy and this, that, and the third? And then they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's not how I live. That's not how I move. Right. And there's this cultural communication division about what both sides are trying to say.
Yeah.
We can never even get to understanding each other.
That's right.
So people just shouting from different corners of the room until they just walk out the door altogether. And both people feel justified for the flag they got in the ground versus understanding, why do you feel that way? Why do you think this? And that's the part for me, like 2 Corinthians 5 says we've been given the ministry of reconciliation. That's literally the whole point of this entire thing. Man, God to man and then man to man.
That's right.
We don't take the time to actually learn what reconciliation is and how to understand each other.
Well, fellowship, I think, is something it's an underappreciated New Testament emphasis.
Just being together.
Fellowship, being together. You know what I'm saying? So if you look at, for example, Peter, in the book of Acts, and he has that whole vision where there's the sheet that came down, and then God's like, don't call those that I've made clean unclean, and so forth. Well, if you look at the chapter before that, before he has that vision, he's living with a guy, Simon the tanner. All right, now who's a tanner? A tanner is somebody who's dealing with dead skins, like leather and stuff like that. For a Jewish person, that would have been like unclean and it's disgusting, like somebody he would not have associated with. Yet he's living with this guy. So before God reveals his truth about the Gentiles, he puts Peter in proximity with somebody to kind of push him out of his comfort zone. Start working it, right?
Yeah, and then after that, Cornelius comes. After that, he gets to go to Cornelius' house. He was I don't want to go to this. I don't want to go to this Roman governor's house.
So you don't have Cornelius without the vision. You don't have and the vision comes after. God begins to do that preparatory work by putting him in proximity. We've lost the power of proximity.
You know what I also noticed, man, too, that is always cool was Samaritan woman's story is just amazing to me. John 4, right?
Yeah.
And Jews and Samaritans, they ain't rock. They just don't hang out.
Right.
They walk a whole extra 2 days so they don't have to walk on the dirt they lived on, right?
That's fact.
So Jesus gets there.
That's real hate right there. That's
real hate. I don't even like your dirt, fam.
Right.
And so Jesus like, y'all need to go ahead. I'm going to stay here and wait for her because they couldn't even handle it. So he deals with her. And then, she runs into town and says, I met a man who, they come out, this the Messiah. They bring them in the city. They spend days with them. The disciples' mind is blown because they now fellowshipping with Samaritans.
Yeah.
What's beautiful about that to me is Jesus goes to the grave, resurrects, leaves, and now they're carrying on the work. You find in the first couple chapters of Acts, Peter and John went back and they went to many Samaritan villages. Come on, later. They couldn't even handle one a couple years ago. Now they're going to many Samaritan villages later because of the proximity Jesus closed.
That's right.
I think
the enemy is really using the power of division against, especially with politics and things like that. Yeah. Because I listen to everything. I watch all the news stations. Yeah. And you hear...
Oh, you mad confused then?
Nah. I step back and look at it from a biblical standpoint. But you'll listen to, say, the conservatives, and they use words like libtards, and they're stupid, and then you listen to the other folks, and they talking crazy about the Republicans, racist, this, that, and the other. So when they walk out of their homes or they get online and they see somebody that's thinking or believe, or they hear a word that sounds like you're on the other side,
right.
I hate you.
Yeah,
I don't even want to talk. I've had friends, because I got friends on both sides. They said, I can't be friends with a Republican.
Yeah,
I can't be friends with a Democrat. You got churches that fell apart because I heard pastors say, don't even come to this church.
Yeah.
if you this or the other.
And what's interesting about that pastor is he skips the
know
entire
what I'm talking
page
about.
that says love your enemy.
How about
Come on, dog.
And
on,
like
bro.
literally your
Come on.
enemy's invited here.
Absolutely.
Like literally.
Should be.
Absolutely.
Should be. Should be.
Absolutely.
Because you skipped the whole part of the book.
Absolutely.
Where Jesus gave his life
Yes.
for the very people that put him on the
Absolutely.
cross.
Absolutely.
And so when pastors do that, pastor, listen to me. When you do that, you are being completely unfaithful to the call you have.
Absolutely.
You know
Come on,
what I
bro.
mean?
Absolutely.
Completely unfaithful.
Absolutely.
You should step down until you figure this thing out.
Oh,
100%.
That's real.
That's real.
That's
That's
real.
Figure this thing out. Learn what love your enemy
Yeah.
means, and then come back and reapply for your job.
These political ideologies, at the end of the day, you're making God in your image. So
Big facts.
that's not what I'm with, and I don't want nobody to get that confused with the God I serve.
Big facts.
No, that's right.
Big facts. So take it. We can stay here. We
Good. But let's move.
take us to why can we trust where the Bible came from? Because in the last episode, you said the gospel started to be written around 50, 60 AD.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Jesus passes on 30, 33 AD, whatever the case may be, resurrection and all that. So why do we know that the gospels were written around that time, and why can we trust them?
Sure. Well, I mean, so let me go back for a second. So you have two different aspects. We can deal with the Old Testament and the New Testament. We'll start with the New, but in your 50s is where most scholars would say that's where Paul is on the scene. He's writing his thing. You know what I'm saying? He's getting down writing as well. And then in the 60s and 70s, many 60s, 70s, and then the Book of John would be actually in about 90 AD. You know what I mean? So all within that first century is where you get the four Gospels, right? Now, to some extent, we know that because we have manuscript evidence. We have, perfect example would be P52, which was discovered in Alexandria, Egypt, which is a fragment of John, right? Which is dated back to early second century,
Explain
late first
P52
century.
for those that don't know.
I'm sorry, yeah. So P52 is a fragment of the Book of John. So it's like when you're doing this kind of work, it all comes down to manuscripts, right? You have people who if you want to use a technical term, textual criticism. Where you're assembling all these manuscripts and you're comparing them against each other to see what the original said.
Seeing if what you have today matches what it says.
Exactly.
All right.
And so P52 would be one of those manuscripts that was discovered. They would date to the early second, if not the first century, right? So when it comes to obviously if something has been written down, then obviously the information was available already, right? So getting back to your question though, even going back to Paul, and we talked about this a little bit in the last show. Some of the elements of Paul's letters, and even in like the Book of Acts, for example, are dated even earlier than the 50s and the 60s because you're dealing with oral history. So those are those creedal passages that we talked about in 1 Corinthians 15, Philippians 2, Acts chapter 2, Romans 10, and so forth, right? So some of the content within the New Testament actually predates the New Testament because you have an oral tradition that extends back to the original days of after the resurrection, right? And so ultimately, and again, like I talked about last time, when I'm making a case, usually I'm coming from the standpoint of somebody who's not a Christian, right? Just looking at kind of the secular evidence first.
Yes.
And the reality is the manuscript evidence for the New Testament is just astonishing, right?
Go into that. Like, what do you mean?
Sure. So if we were talking about Homer's Iliad, and the Odyssey, people would say, okay, we got a pretty good representation of that. We got about 700 manuscripts that we can look at, and that's pretty good. But when we did talk about the New Testament, we have about 5,000, just over 5,000 Greek manuscripts for the New Testament documents, right? So if you think that Homer's Iliad and Odyssey is relatively reliable, then you definitely should think that the New Testament is reliable, right? Because that's how we assess reliability, is being able to get these manuscripts together and compare them against one another.
Let me know if I'm off on this in the Iliad and Odyssey. I think the earliest manuscripts we have from the date they claim to be written, a couple centuries removed.
Exactly right.
700 centuries later is when it's like this was written back then, and that's the earliest we have.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Versus a couple decades.
No, that's good.
Scholars will live by Homer's Iliad.
It's true. It's true because somebody said that for the Greeks, like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey is like the older New Testament for the Greeks and whatever. So it was preserved well for those reasons. But to your point, it was much later in terms of what we have from a manuscript standpoint. That being said, so we got about 5,000. Just a Greek manuscript. But then when you start adding in Syriac, Ge'ez, which is the Ethiopian language, when you start adding in Latin, you start getting up to over 20,000 manuscripts.
Yeah.
Just for the New Testament, right?
Oh, the Bible's in Ethiopia?
Oh, it certainly was. It certainly was.
Hey,
we could talk about that.
Ireland or
Hey,
Scotland.
Josh, whenever when he says, "Oh, the Bible was in Ethiopia," find a way to zoom in on his face. That he made that eyebrow. You got it around like that. The lip hang down.
Eyebrow jump. Hit it with a rock eyebrow.
They be killing me with this white man's religion.
No, man. Well, I mean, Ethiopia is between them and Armenia is the argument in terms of which one of them was the first to be declared a Christian nation.
Yeah.
Going back to the
And they didn't have no slave owners come there and get
No, not at all.
Yeah,
Not at all.
right.
I mean, this is a little bit of an aside, but actually, it becomes a Christian nation in part because there was a gentleman named Frumentius, who, as the story goes, he was shipwrecked and ends up being enslaved. A servant in the king's court. He was a tutor, rather. That's what I'm trying to say. He was a tutor, and then, long story short, is through the king at the time was like, all right, cool, this Christianity stuff is dope. Let me convert the whole kingdom. So that's kind of how that went down. That's a super short version. Yeah, but nevertheless, Ethiopia,
When they like the oldest Christian nation, or like with the 70s when they officially became not a Christian nation anymore, right? Ethiopia. When the 70 something?
Yeah, I mean, so so the argument is between them and Armenia in terms of who's the oldest. They're like right there neck and neck together. So Ethiopia, as I understand it, has the archaeological edge, in terms of being able to show, like based upon like coins, for example, because you can see King Azana where he was, it's like a moon god of some sort. You can see it on the inscription of the coins, and then it switches over to the cross. So they actually have archaeology to show them when it happened. I don't think Armenia has something that strong from an archeological standpoint. But I mean, still, you have churches in Ethiopia today that are 1,500 years old.
Yeah,
1,500 years old. Carved out of the rock. You know what I mean? So it's anyway, we could have a conversation.
I didn't know anything about it, and I was somewhere, and this dude was talking about it, and I was like, "Bro, where'd you get this?" And he's like, "Man, he gave me a textbook called Ethiopian Christianity." I read it, and I was like, "This is." They didn't talk about that over here.
Hey, well, shameless plug. You can definitely check out the Unspoken documentary, which I was in that as well. Filmed it right here. So it's on Tubi, Amazon Prime, and so forth. It's like 2 hours of this stuff.
Lisa Fields joint, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Definitely want to check that out.
We get into all that, man. Just like how, to put it short, there's about 2,000 years of Christianity on the continent of Africa, with about 1,400 to 1,500 that coming before the transatlantic slave trade.
Right,
you know what I mean? So this idea that Christianity is the white man's religion
doesn't make any sense.
It's crazy.
And if a white man was say to come up with that, why would he put it in a place with melanated people? Why wouldn't it be like in Ireland or Scotland?
Even more than that though. Like, why would he put it there? And partly in Africa, and also the Middle East.
Yeah.
But then also, why would you make white people the bad guys of the story? They killed Jesus.
Right.
It's like if we gonna do it, we're not gonna be the bad guy.
It off of the visuals that was given through movies,
right,
books, and the little long-haired lily man that they see.
But here's the thing though. I'll just say this real quick. There's a lot we can say here, but the reality is, from the beginning of the Christian, we can look at this in Acts chapter 2. You have Africans present from the beginning. In Acts chapter 13, we could talk about Simon, who was called Niger, who was one of the prophets and teachers that laid hands on the Apostle Paul before he's sent on his first mission, right? So, and even then, you got Christianity spread into Egypt and Tunisia and North Africa, all from the first century. So the fact of the matter is, and I'll just make this quick, but if you look at the 5 main nations that enslaved our people during the transatlantic slave trade, dealing with the English, the Danish, the French, the Portuguese, and so forth.
And the African who handed us over.
Yeah, we can go there too.
Yep.
But as far as those European nations, the oldest of them would be Britain in terms of kind of their beginnings. That goes to about the 5th century or so, right? That they might say. So that means that Africa was flourishing, and that Christianity was flourishing in Africa for about 5 centuries before any of the nations that enslaved our people even existed.
Right. Come on.
Right. So it's just. Anyway, that's Felice. I know I got off topic.
That's not.
But
I'm saying all this is doing is underlining why we can trust what the Bible.
Yeah,
100%. Right.
Because it's
So,
go ahead.
let me ask you this, man. And does the color of Christ really matter?
So it depends on what we mean by really matter, right? Does it matter in terms of doctrine, salvation, anything related to eternity? No.
Right.
Does it matter historically? I think that we should always present truth whenever possible. Absolutely. And so to whatever extent, we should be people of truth, right? So it's not true that Jesus was like this Pantene Pro V white guy, walking through the desert, you know what I mean, with not a blemish on it. That's not true.
That's not true.
It's true.
Because wasn't it in that culture, it was even against their culture to have long hair at that time?
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have had long hair, you know what I mean, unless he was like a Nazarite, which, there's no reason to think that he would have been. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think that if we're going to depict somebody historically, then we should do it as well as we possibly can. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying he had to necessarily be,
Afro.
jet black.
Yeah.
Maybe he was. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? But it's just we can safely say that he didn't look like Eminem. You know what I mean?
Right.
We got to cut that out, bro.
Or he got to look like Ned the wino off of Good Time.
Oh, good.
No, you ain't gotta do that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But we're not supposed to make a graven image either, are we?
No, so we're not. Now, granted, I mean, our Catholic brothers and sisters would disagree in terms of what constitutes a graven image and so on and so forth. But
debate.
one thing we can say, if you're going to do it, then do it right. You're saying let's not leave room for deception in how we present Jesus or any biblical character.
So one thing, and I think I mentioned this to Nigel. So my 7-year-old, he came to me one morning. He said, "Dad, do black people go to heaven?"
Wow.
And I'm like, yo, why would you ask me that question? Like, what made you ask? Yeah. So then we just they go to a Christian school where we are, so we just put them in there. So I'm thinking, well, did he hear something at school? Like, why would you ask me this? And so it turns out there's an app that he has on his iPad that we have them read and watch, and it's cartoons and stuff. But on this particular app, there's not a lot of black representation. And so for him at 7, he's seeing that.
Right.
And it's now impacted him like, well, where are we at in the Bible?
Yeah. Everywhere.
Where are we? Right.
Everywhere.
Where are we when it comes, when we die, we go to heaven? Because even in the app, it shows the angels and people in heaven and things of that nature.
Got a certain type of hair.
Right. It's nobody that looks like him.
Yeah.
And so, when he said that to me, now I've had this conversation with grown people.
Yeah.
I've never had it with a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's deep.
But to have that conversation with a child and with it being my son, it just flipped it and made me look at it.
Wow.
And the importance
so much
of these
different.
visuals that people put out, the representation that they put out. I mean, that's why I do what I do for real. I want to represent things properly.
Right.
That was a fantastic answer though about you talking about doctrine, you talking about history. I like
two different things,
that was a great answer.
So it can be important in one sense and then another.
Right.
So now tying two things together. No, that's cool.
Continue
That's cool.
what you was gonna say.
Tying a couple of things together when we're talking about trusting the Bible and this ethnicity piece, identity piece, right? Now, somebody might have distrust for the Bible because, we don't know how well it's preserved, blah, blah, blah. And that kind of gets to the manuscript evidence. But what you're hitting on is, maybe we can't trust the Bible because of something like representation. Like where are we at? And the fact is, like you said a minute ago, like we all over the place in the Bible. You know what I mean? We could talk about a brother named Ebed Melech, in the book of Jeremiah, where, they get Jeremiah was prophesying the destruction of Israel and some folks had him lined up. It's like, all right, cool, we about to get him off. So the king orders him to be cast in a pit. As a gentleman named Ebed Melech, who's a Cushite, right? Cush people look like me. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're a Cushite, you have some melanin, right?
Yeah.
So Ebed Melech petitions to the king and actually has Jeremiah rescued, right? And when he's rescued later on, when the destruction does happen, Ebed Melech, the Bible says the Lord preserves him. You know what I'm saying? And he has, he's given special favor because of what he did for Jeremiah. We could talk about, I already mentioned Simon of Niger, but we could talk about several other figures too. But here's what I want to get to, right? Even I'm talking to skeptics right now. Say maybe you don't believe the Bible or whatever. So let's not go to a Bible story. Just the Bible itself, right? When I pick up this Bible and I see Old Testament, I see New Testament. Where do those phrases come from? It comes from a North African theologian named Tertullian. Who was the first to coin those phrases, Old Testament and New Testament. Yeah. Let's talk about Athanasius, who in his Feasta letter, I think it was the 37th Feasta letter, he outlined the 27 books of the New Testament that framed the conversation of what the New Testament be constituted of moving forward. We could talk about St. Augustine, right? Coming into the late 4th century. St. Augustine, who we know his mother's name was Monica, and based upon grave sites and things of that nature, they were able to trace the name Monica back to being from the indigenous Berber tribe. So he was an indigenous African on his mother's side. St. Augustine presided over 3 councils in which there was like the first major councils to affirm what the New Testament canon would look like. And so when it comes to this Bible that we hold in our hands, you can't hold this Bible without looking at African contributions to the Christian story. So Africans have never been apart from God's story. It's never been the case that God is doing a move on the earth and Africans aren't involved. And so we just really need to do a better job. And this goes to something you were saying earlier in terms of why this is important for everybody. But we have to reclaim the multi-ethnic work that God has done through the church and throughout salvific history. We have to reclaim that.
Absolutely.
That right there is a response to the division and racism and so forth that we're seeing today.
It is, bro. It's never, I mean, even if you get outside of, because people get stuck up on the Jewish people being, the chosen, right? They get stuck on there. You go back beyond that, man. The very first thing is Abraham, and the very first promise is a blessing to all nations. To all nations. Idea.
That's right.
Before there was even a, hey, I'm going to mark out this family to bring a lineage of the Messiah through.
That's right.
Way from the jump, it was like, this is for everybody.
Right.
From the very beginning of the story.
And it was never about biology.
No.
Right.
Because you got to think about, even when Moses is laying down the law, you know what I'm saying? It's passages, I want to say it's in, I'm going to mess this up. I'll just say it's Exodus, but where he's talking about the Passover, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And if somebody wants to partake in the Passover, but they're a foreigner, then they can get circumcised and so forth, and then keep the Passover like everybody else. Mm-hmm. That's not just cutting off your foreskin so you can eat some lamb. I'm saying, like, he's saying, like, you can get circumcised and then enter into covenant worship along with
the community, right?
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? You talking about the mixed multitude coming out of Egypt, with the people. You know what I mean? Like, it's never been about biology.
Yeah,
it's been about God's promise.
Yeah, but the laws were always like, keep a corner of your field in case an alien and a foreigner shows up and they need some food. Like, it was always just welcome them here kind of situation. Always. It was never this keep them over there.
Right.
And so that piece is just, and because it just comes into fruition in the 2 Corinthians 5. It's like, this is the ministry of reconciliation.
Right.
That's been here from the jump.
Right.
And God didn't change when they divided it in the Old and New Testament.
Right.
Like,
but I mean,
you know what I'm saying?
look at what Paul said, right? So Paul in Galatians, he talks about how he confronted Peter, right?
Yes,
Peter was like acting some kind of way towards the Gentiles, ushering out the back door when the Jews showed up. And Paul's like, he said, I withstood him to his face.
Yeah.
And what he said was, he didn't say, man, that's not cool, I don't like what you're doing. He said, no, you're out of step with the gospel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're out of step with the gospel. This is a gospel offense.
You're leading the church.
You know what I'm saying?
And you missed the point.
And you missed the point.
Like, that's a crazy check.
Bruh.
Peter get checked all the time.
And Peter be like, dog, you wasn't even walking with Christ. Like, you just got here yesterday. Like, how you gonna check me? Like,
you been here 3 weeks. He should have rolled up. Like, you been here 3 weeks, man.
Right.
So validity of the text. When you're talking about textual criticism, when you're talking about where it came from, why we can believe these stories, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody gets it mixed up. Well, like, that's cool, but ain't nobody actually getting up out the grave. Like, ain't nobody, this is a myth, right? Like, this is cool stories. Even if they wrote it in and believed it, it's a myth. Like, all that type of stuff is in there, and people really get hung up on that type of stuff. Where do we get the fact that we can really trust this book right here? Because that's just, because like I said, the two biggest questions is Jesus who he said he is? Can I trust this book? Why can I trust this book? You've already laid out a bunch, but I just got to keep digging into other arguments.
That's cool. So I'm going to separate that into three different questions, I'm saying, in a sense. So we say, how do we know? There's different types of knowledge. There's at least three types of knowledge. You have what's called propositional knowledge. You have knowledge of acquaintance, and then you have procedural knowledge. So propositional knowledge is like book smart knowledge. You just knowing information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Break all that down.
Knowledge of acquaintance is to actually know somebody, by firsthand experience. I'm saying, like, so I can. If my wife, walks in the room, I can see her in my corner. I know that's my wife, just because we have that experience together. I can recognize her, right? Then you have procedural knowledge, which is like how to shoot a jump shot. You know what I'm saying? You have that muscle memory, you know what I mean? Or like ride a bicycle or something like that. So there's three types of knowledge. And so what we don't want to do, because we talked about this off camera, like, we're whole persons, right? And I believe that the biblical worldview has resources to appeal to us in all three of those forms of knowledge. Yeah. Now, when it comes to the propositional side, just the information in the scriptures, we talked a little bit about the manuscript evidence. We could get into like the Masoretic text and how well it preserved the Old Testament. For those who don't know, the Masoretic text is just kind of like a tradition or family of manuscripts documenting what was in our Old Testament, or I say the Hebrew Bible. I'm saying over time, when you look at the manuscripts from that, we call it manuscript tradition or family, if you will, you can trace it back and see how it was just amazingly preserved. I mean, the Masoretes, who were the scribes, who would who were making these different copies, pass them along and so forth, they just took a meticulous approach to preserving what God said, to the point where if they're going to hand, let's say if I'm going to hand, JB and say, you got to copy this and it's, it's your turn. And then you're going to hand it to Legend and you're going to hand it to, what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. I was in the flow and I lost, at each point, there's these checks and balances where it's like there's notes at the end of every book saying, okay, here's how many words that you should have. And if you don't have this right amount of words, then you messed up somewhere. Here's what letter and what word should be in the middle of such and such page. And if you don't have that right, you got to start over, things like that. There are all these different details in this meticulous approach to preserving the Old Testament text, where even, with the Dead Sea Scrolls,
I was about to say, Dead Sea Scrolls is on point to this day.
Right. When you look at the book of Isaiah, that was discovered amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1940s, and see just an amazing degree of alignment with the text that we already had, which tells us, hey, you know what? These people weren't playing around when it comes to preserving God's word, right? And so I said all that to say that when it comes to that propositional side, right, we have good reason to believe that there's been a great deal of care in terms of how these passages and scriptures were translated from generation to generation. That's a concise version, right? Yeah, they're not just being flippant about it. I mean, even to the point where, for example, and this came out with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. It's like in the text that we already had that dated to about the 10th century or so for the Masoretic text. In the book of Jeremiah, there's certain words that have two Y's, like a double Y. And then that particular word is like one instance where it only has one Y. And when they discovered it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was the same thing. Like the double Y was present in that one text everywhere except for that one time, whereas the one Y. So that tradition of preserving the double Y versus the one Y was consistent from the 10th century all the way back to at least 1,000 years before.
Because some folks start talking about King James changed it, and
they act like King James did it. Like he wasn't even the dude translating. It's like the Bible. It was that version was named after him, but he wasn't the dude sitting down transcribing so on and so forth.
But credit for it.
Right. So we can say a lot more of that. We can get into archaeology and things of that nature. Matter of fact, just last year there was a huge discovery with the Pool of Siloam that's mentioned in the New Testament. They discovered that just last year. But these with all the 5 porticos and so forth. So it's not like, Christians making it up. Yeah, there's like archaeological evidence.
They actually found chariots under the Red Sea.
Oh, you got me on that one. Okay.
Yeah, cool. They saw these shapes down there, and they started looking at them, and they paid attention to it, and it looks like chariots.
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Like even they've actually, and it's controversial, back in 2002. So let me back up for a second. So back in the day, what the Jews would do is they would bury somebody, and then once the flesh rotted off, basically they would put their bones in a box because they believed they'd be preserved for the last resurrection. So these boxes are called ossuaries or bone boxes. So they actually found a bone box in 2002 that said James, son of Joseph, brother of Yeshua.
Come on, bro.
Real rap. So they went to court over it in terms of whether it's a forgery or not, and so on and so forth. Nobody's been able to disprove it thus far. But anyways, so there's a number of different reasons why we can affirm that this work has been preserved over time. That's the proposition.
They actually found I think I got to make sure I may be misrepresented, but the archaeological find in Israel, what they believe is probably the oldest house church we have on record, and actually flying it to the Museum of the Bible for a special exhibit for this fall.
That's fire.
And they said in the ground is written Jesus is God.
Come on, though.
It's like and it's like 100 AD or something like that. So it's like this blowing away this whole myth that happened a couple hundred years later.
It's the only where you find this stuff, man.
Right. And so that's important because so this is somewhat of a side, but when it comes to the YouTubers and all that kind of stuff, everything is about the Council of Nicaea. They didn't say Jesus was God, so the Council of Nicaea, but I mean that disproves it.
It didn't come out till such and such century.
And that Popeye's chicken recipe didn't come out till the Council of Nicaea. Right.
Come on, dog.
It's all kind of stuff. You know what I mean? But
it's just but I mean, like you said, if these texts are dated, a couple hundred years for the Council of Nicaea,
right?
And they're claiming things, and so if you can believe this, it's not the Council of Nicaea that said, all right, this is it. Right. And then this is when he became God, and then all the text changed from there. But we have text dating before the council. What are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
So
exactly.
It's just it's interesting to me, man.
And so I'll wrap it up with this and say I'll be quicker with this one, I promise. But when you talk about that procedural knowledge, that kind of know-how, the riding the bike type knowledge, I think it's important that today, particularly post enlightenment, we want to put everything on the propositional knowledge side, the intellect. But the Bible wasn't written that way. No. It wasn't written for you just to gain information in like an encyclopedia or something like that. It's written to be lived out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when it comes to how do we know, that the Bible is what it says it is, right? To some extent, there's a living out that has to take place. And it's that procedural knowledge, that know-how of actually living with God, and you gain through those experiences in your course of life that, wait a minute, this book is not just I'm not just reading it; it's reading me.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's coupled with this notion of the Knowledge of a Queen too, because you're coming to know a person. Like we're not just trying to give you a book. Ultimately, this book, the 66 books, is pointing to a person, the person of Jesus Christ.
Telling his character.
And so those are two, I think, aspects of knowledge, of that knowing about to the veracity of Scripture that I think is often left out. We can't just put everything on the propositional side, the intellect, book smart side. This thing is meant to be lived out.
Yeah,
you know,
no doubt.
and you gain a type of knowledge in doing so that you wouldn't otherwise.
No doubt. Do you want to ask your joint?
Well, we was talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. You
Yeah.
know, they had some extra biblical books in there. How do you feel about them? Like the Book of Enoch, for instance.
Yeah, so out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I want to say you're looking at about, it's quite clearly like about 1,000 or so fragments and different pieces. You know, about 230 or so of those would be biblical texts. You know, so there's a whole bunch of stuff, you know, that wasn't.
Right.
Now, I would say that I would deal with it in the same way that the ancient Jews would, right?
Okay.
They had a recognition that there were texts. And some of them are even mentioned in the Bible. They talk about like the Book of Jasher and the Book of like Wars of the Lord and things of that nature. You know, the Book of Eden, you know, in Jude talks about Enoch. And so there are some books that were considered to be valuable, but not necessarily inspired.
Okay,
right?
gotcha. Okay.
And so that's a distinction that even amongst the ancient Jews, they would have made. So they would have said something like, there's this whole, you look at the law, there are all these codes around cleanliness. Like if somebody has leprosy, they're declared unclean. Or maybe if a woman is on her cycle, then during that period she's unclean. But one application of it is if you touch a sacred, like an inspired book, it says, you know, these books make the hands unclean, right? Because it was considered to be so holy, right?
Yeah.
Now we have that attested to with respect to books that were laid up in the temple that account for the 39 books that we have in our Old Testament today. But that same thing is not necessarily attributed to some of those extra books like Enoch and so on and so forth. So there would be books that we might call apocryphal,
Yes.
you know, that may be valuable in terms of, you know, in the same way that a book
History,
written by
thought.
history, thought, and, you know, what was going on at
And
the
that was
time
my
and things
main
of that nature.
concern. Because I did a lot of study of the Book of Enoch and it connected some dots, especially when it came to Genesis and, you know, what happened with the Nephilim and all of that.
Sure, yeah.
So I thought it was very interesting.
And I'll put Enoch in that category and just say that, you know, just in general, there's a difference between value and then just like this higher level of value, which regards to something being, you know, canon or sacred. Yeah.
So wrapping up, what are some starter level resources for somebody who's like, I want to dig into this myself?
For sure, man. So when it comes to
Basic. Like you got to start from
yeah, basically.
2 plus 2.
Well, Dan Wallace is awesome, man. There's a brother named Dan Wallace. I don't know why I mean, he's written several books, you know, but if people just Google Dan Wallace, I mean, he's got a number of different books.
Is there a
so I'm
book
just
from
naming
him
authors.
that you like that is a good?
Oh Lord, I can't remember the name.
Oh, okay.
I'm a mess. But
This is what we do.
YouTube them. You know what I mean?
It's easy. The Adam Coleman Starter Kit.
There we
Adam Coleman Starter Kit? Okay.
Yeah.
What does that consist of?
That's a good question.
Oh man, I don't even know. That's terrible. See, because I'm a philosophy nerd. You know what I mean? So it's just like, you know. So I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'll say this. Yeah, Frank, you can start with
YouTube,
When it comes to apologetics, I think Frank Turek is definitely good. I think J. Warner Wallace is definitely good. He's got several books. All these people have several books I would recommend. Gary Habermas and Mike Licona, The Resurrection of Christ. That's a really good one. When it comes to the biblical side of it, Michael Kruger, you know, Michael Kruger. So that's kind of easy to remember. You can think about Freddy Krueger. At least for people our age group. So Michael Kruger, he's definitely a great author. And Dan Wallace as well. So those are all authors that I would recommend. And the reason why I recommend authors and not just books, because they each have several. And my hope is that people will feel, you know, enticed to go, you know, just feast on all of that. That's my hope. You know?
Got a book coming?
Yeah.
I do, actually. I do have a book coming, you know. So, I mean, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel, Volume 1 and 2, the first of which I contributed to. I mentioned the unspoken documentary, but I am actually working on my own book, man. So hopefully it'll be done sometime next year, for sure. It's good, bro.
That's really
Black and Christian Healing the Identity Conflict. That's the title. You know, man.
Come on, man.
Hey, what's your Scrabble game like?
You know what? It's getting better. I'm
It's
surprisingly
already strong.
Surprisingly poor at Scrabble. You know what I'm saying?
Really?
Yeah. You know, I'm not great. I'm not great. You know,
I would think he'd be a monster. At Scrabble.
My brother got
I don't
so
know,
many
man.
interesting factoids.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
You could just make up words and everybody was going to question.
Yeah.
They gonna let it
I know about that.
I tried that. It doesn't work. That's seriously. I tried.
Like you said the last episode, I learned the word
Challenge that.
infodemic.
Man,
Crazy.
you know.
You know what I mean?
That's crazy.
That's what's
Like
up.
it's all right. It's all right.
That'll work.
Yeah, this was good, bro.
This is good, brother.
I appreciate y'all,
you, man.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming, bro.
You
Thank you
know,
for
bro.
dropping the knowledge.
Yes, sir.
And hopefully we got this event we're planning that we'll announce at some point, which I shouldn't talk about right now, but hopefully it'll come.
How you should.
Definitely.
One more fist bump. I missed it.
No, you good. You good. Yeah, I appreciate
Look, appreciate you being here. Hit us with the 5-star joint and do all the things. Share this with your people. And if this is helpful, man, share it with your folks, man. And check out my man Adam Coleman, True ID Apologetics. Check out my new album, God is Iconic, deluxe version coming soon, probably after this drops, but go get it anyway. And we love y'all, man. Appreciate you. Hey, man, thank you so much for watching this episode. Do me a favor. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Go to the show notes, do all the things, and let us know what you're feeling, because we'd love to hear from you. Appreciate you.